Okay, so there's this huge shift happening right now in the world of learning. We're talking about a complete redesign of how we educate people, moving away from this old, rigid factory style model to something way more flexible, dynamic, and actually built for the way our minds work today.
But let's start with a feeling I bet we've all had. You ever sit in a classroom or maybe a corporate training and just get this feeling that this is all completely outdated? Like it was designed for a world that just doesn't exist anymore. Well, if you've ever felt that, you are not wrong.
And here's exactly where that feeling comes from. On the one hand, you've got the industrial age, which is where our education system was born. It was all about standardization, control, and making sure everyone complied. But on the other hand, we're living deep in the information age, a world that demands customization, teamwork, and initiative. We're trying to prep people for the world on the right using a system built for the world on the left. It's a fundamental mismatch.
Yeah, this whole mismatch, it actually has a name. A lot of people call it the education factory. And that name is perfect because the system wasn't really built to develop every person's potential. It was built to sort them efficiently.
And get this, it wasn't an accident. As the theorist Charles Regeluth points out, this was a deliberate design choice. The whole system was modeled after an industrial assembly line. Its main job was to churn out people who could neatly fill jobs on the factory floor or in a clerical office. That goal is just completely out of sync with what we need today, which is creativity and problem solving.
So, okay, if that old factory model is obsolete, what do? We can't just tear everything down without a plan. We need a new blueprint for learning. And here's a really critical point. The answer isn't just to throw a bunch of new technology at the problem, buy some tablets and software and call it a day. The tools don't matter if the thinking behind them is still old. What we really need is a whole new theory of how we design learning from the ground up.
And that new way of thinking? It's called instructional design theory, and it basically flips the old model on its head. See, instead of starting with a bunch of content to cover, you start at the end. You figure out the desired outcome first, what you want people to be able to do. Then you look at the situation, the learners, the environment, and only then do you pick the right methods to get them there. It's strategic, and it's all about the goal.
Now, the most powerful part of this is that it's what's called a design-oriented theory. It's not just some abstract idea, it's a practical how-to guide. It doesn't just describe what's wrong, it gives you a roadmap for how to actually fix it. Let me break that down. A descriptive theory, that's like a commentator. It looks at a classroom and asks, what's happening here? It just describes reality. But a design-oriented theory, that's the architect. It asks, how can we build a better outcome? One just watches the game, the other designs the stadium. It's a huge difference. So who are these architects? Who's actually using this new blueprint to rebuild learning for the 21st century? Well, they are the change agents making it all happen.
They're called instructional designers. And really, that title is perfect because they are, quite literally, the architects of learning experiences and entire educational systems. And their job is huge. They're at the center of everything, talking with teachers, students, and administrators to figure out what's really needed. They dig deep to find the real problems and opportunities. They're constantly vetting new tech and new strategies to find the perfect fit. But maybe most importantly, they don't just build the new thing and walk away. They build the support systems to make sure the change actually sticks. They are the engine that drives real change.
So how do they manage all this complexity? I mean, that's a lot to juggle, right? Well, they use a really powerful way of thinking. They think in systems.
And it's a pretty logical process. First, you identify all the moving parts in a learning environment. Second, you figure out how they're all connected, how changing one thing over here affects everything over there. And then, once you see the whole picture, you can make smart, targeted changes to improve the whole system. Okay, that's the theory. But what does this actually look like when the rubber hits the road? Let's take a massive, messy, real-world challenge. A university deciding to move an entire degree program online. Wow, that's a huge project. Where would you even begin? Well, an instructional designer starts by mapping out that entire ecosystem, because it is so much more than just recording a few lectures. They have to ask the hard questions. Are the professors ready for this? How are we going to keep students from just tuning out? Does the admissions process need to change? They know that if you pull on one little thread, the whole thing could come apart if you're not careful. So when you take this really holistic approach, the result is something that looks and feels radically different from that old factory. You finally get an environment that's truly designed for the learner.
And this leads to a huge shift in the role of the teacher. We move away from the idea of the sage on the stage, the all-knowing expert who just talks at you. Instead, the teacher becomes the guide on the side, a facilitator, a coach, who's there to help you discover things for yourself.
And look at the amazing toolkit this opens up. Suddenly, learning isn't just about lectures. We're talking about hands-on simulations, group projects, educational games, solving real-world problems, the whole shebang. It's about having a rich toolbox and knowing which tool to use for which job.
So when you add it all up, you get a totally new paradigm for learning. It's a shift from standardization to real customization, a shift from a system that just sorts people to one that actually fosters their potential. And a huge shift away from just passive listening to active, self-directed learning.
Ultimately, it really all comes down to this one idea: intentionality. It's about thoughtfully and consciously designing a learning system where every single person has the tools, the support, and a clear path to succeed.
But this transformation is never really finished. It's an ongoing process. As our world keeps changing at this dizzying speed, maybe the most important skill we can have is the ability to continuously redesign how we learn. So the question we're left with isn't just, what's next for education? It's, what will we design next?